Shining is one of those series that's hard to approach from a Western perspective. Shining Force 1 and 2 overshadow the entire franchise, to such a degree that anything that's not a strategy RPG gets scoffed at for not being a proper part of the series. I might have been part of the problem myself, because the only other Shining game that I've played was Shining Soul on the GBA. I did not like that game. Being more open-minded now, I wanted to give other parts of the Shining series a chance, picking up Shining Force EXA. Shining Force EXA follows a young boy named Toma, intent on finding the legendary weapon, the Shining Force.
The
game starts at what feels like the end of a typical RPG journey. The main party is already familiar with each other, with plenty of hints that they've traveled the lands in search of the sword for a long time now. They feel like they're close to the end, but coming up short. The Shining Force seems out of reach and their journey is at a dead end. Cyril, the other main protagonist of the game, is part of Toma's group. She's been intentionally sabotaging their search for the Shining Force, misdirecting them on their search to stop them from finding it. Unfortunately for her, and fortunately for the others, her plans fail, and they stumble upon the legendary sword, sealed away in a cave. From here, the fortress inherited by the wielder of the Shining Force puts Toma on the fast track to become a super powerful ruler. Why? Don't worry about it. That's Cyril's job. Oh, and there's a war going on between two nations that both see Toma as an interesting pawn that they can use to eliminate each other. Don't worry about that either, just become strong. There's nothing about this that could possibly go wrong. Shining Force EXA is a very straightforward game. The part leading up to getting the sword is basically a combat tutorial for your two lead characters. After that, you get to the true game, where you have access to a super dimension fortress that could potentially solve all issues standing in your way, if only it had that little bit of extra power unlocked. Why would a fortress like this exist? And why does it need that power? Don't worry about it. So you set out, warping to different parts of the world from convenient fast travel nodes. You even get a free town portal ability at your disposal. All this to engage in some good Diablo-style hack-and-slash combat. The attack button gives you a regular combo. Holding the button lets you charge up a special attack, with different types of charged attacks based on if you immediately do one or do it later in the combo. A lot of the time, these charged attacks can lead to other charged attacks after them, which often cost a lot of mana to use but clear a large group of enemies fast. One of the fun things about combat in EXA is that a lot of the named weapons have different attack animations and combos, and the different combos have different charge attack behaviors. They all have different reaches too, which are listed as actual weapon stats when comparing them in the equipment menu. Weapons also come with magic spells linked to them, but we'll talk more about that later. Toma gets 2 types of weapons: one-handed swords that still let him equip shields in his other hand, and big 2-handed weapons, including scythes and axes, which are slower but deal a lot more damage. They won't let you get bonuses from equipping a shield though. Being a Diablo-style game, the deeper into the game you get, the more enemies appear in larger groups. It's not uncommon for the entire screen to become a complete clusterfuck full of enemies and effects, and especially with this genre, I quite like that. Enemies bring in loot too, and loot works a bit different than it does in Diablo. At least different compared to the versions of Diablo that existed back then. There's weapons and armor, which need to be identified at the shop in your fortress. Anything that's not worth using isn't necessarily just vendor trash though. It goes to a different thing rather than become part of a money generator. One of the other big drops you'll find from both enemies and huge crystal deposits in the field is Mithril. Mithril is used to upgrade skills, not in a regular leveling up style where you get skill points to put into a skill tree, but it's somewhat close to that idea. The skills you put Mithril into are scattered around the world map as these big monoliths. Once you've found one and interacted with it, the skill is added to your list back at the white base. Putting Mithril into it gradually gives you the benefits of those skills. They're all passive abilities, improving your regular stats. In some way, having that secondary currency for detached passive skills to power yourself up, as well as the way you basically liquidate worthless junk items for that secondary non-standard currency, reminds me of Path of Exile in a weird way. You still level up in the traditional sense, beating up monsters for experience points to get higher base stats. But then you have these modifiers from a secondary currency removed from regular money that gives you stun resistance or bonus damage against certain enemy types, stronger magic casting abilities, better MP regeneration, things like that. Meanwhile, your party members don't even get regular equipment. They do get a form of gear, but those are basically battle modes you can set them to control how they fight. You don't directly control them. Maybe they should have given you a little control over them though, because the party members have the tendency to get stuck in the terrain every now and again. You do control someone else though, as Shining Force EXA has a dual protagonist setup. Cyril has 2 options in terms of weapons: bows, firing off projectiles into the distance, or books, focusing on magic. So you can fire darts at enemies barely on the screen, or do this. So, why would you play as the other protagonist once you've picked one? You don't really get a choice in this matter. You have to play as both of them. Outside of a few story moments, which one you play and when is entirely up to you. Whenever you're out exploring with one character, you sometimes get these big warnings on the screen that the fortress is under attack. When this happens, the game switches over to the other character who has to carry out a defensive mission.
なんでジオフォートには完全自動の迎撃システムがついてないのかしら?
Defensive missions remind me a lot of those town attacks in Ys 8. Your fortress has a bunch of energy generators on the ground, each located in their own arena, and enemies will try to swarm them in one of those arenas to destroy the things. You have to crush the enemy invasion before they destroy your generator. Defensive missions are where most of the especially chaotic and frame rate destroying fights happen. There's often obstacles like out-of-the-way enemy generators that need to be destroyed to stop them from overwhelming you. Cannons firing at your generator from long range that need to be removed from battle before they chip down its health. Usually a boss shows up after a while, and taking them down ends the fight no matter how many enemies there are left. Clearing these fights also rewards you with a ton of Mithril, so you do get rewarded from the break away from your regular adventure. It's often a good idea to grind the training dungeon a little bit with your off character at the start of each chapter. That way they don't lag behind your main character too much before you get thrown into one of these fights, since losing these fights is a hard game over, and once the warning starts you are expected to make it through one of those fights with that character. The training dungeon is basically the most true to Diablo the gameplay gets in this game. It's basically a randomly generated cave with multiple floors before a big boss fight. And the end rewards of beating one of those bosses is also one of the passive skill monoliths, and a lot of Mithril. One interesting thing is that improving the power of one character always improves the other two. Mithril is gained globally, but spent individually. So all the Mithril that Toma finds will also count towards Cyril's total, but spending all of your Mithril as Cyril doesn't mean that Toma is out of his stock. It's a good system for a dual protagonist game. The armor and weapon types are separated between the two characters, though the game is kind enough to put an item bin in the corner of the main hall of the fortress, letting you manage inventories between the two, as well as stash away items for later. Every named piece of armor and helmet is also visible on the character model, which is always nice. Something that really took me by surprise though is how Shining Force EXA handles its healing. Healing potions automatically fill up at healing fountains, so if you have 3 healing potions and you use one, you're back at the total of 3 after interacting with a healing fountain. There's quite a few healing potions you find along the way, and they're both color-coded for use with Toma and Cyril separately, but this is one of those things that really reminds me of Path of Exile. I wish more games had stocked restorative items that don't run out, refreshing back to their natural capacity at regular intervals. The same goes with mana potions in this game too. It's good stuff. One thing Shining Force EXA also does that I like is that the game will put up these fences going, hey, don't go this way, this is not where the main story is. This doesn't mean that you can't go there, you can smash that fence and go that direction anyway. In a way, it makes deviating from the course feel even better since you're basically trespassing outside of the play area. Sometimes you're rewarded, and sometimes you're killed and you know you should come back here later. But either way, the game tries to keep you on track for the main story while still letting you go off and do whatever. I respect that. There's also these ominous statues with monster sealed in them that the game warns you about. They might be dangerous to smash open. If you do manage to kill whatever was in there, you unlock a passive skill you can slot into your equipment to further boost your power. If you don't manage to kill what's in there, well, the game did warn you it's a powerful monster that's in there. Similarly, there's these caves with short combat trials scattered around the world. Clearing them gives you one of those skill monoliths. You know they're serious business because they'll always have a warp spot right next to their entrance, allowing you to go back to them later from your base whenever you're ready to tackle them. Before you get deep in there though, there's an introductory floor where they throw a smaller amount of weaker enemies at you as a preliminary test. Sometimes this weaker wave of enemies can also just kill you outright. I like it when games let you explore it outside of your comfort zone and remind you that adventures are actually dangerous. Not enough games do that. There's a couple of things I should quickly note though. First off, I played Shining Force EXA using an undubbed version. The original Japanese voice cast includes Romy Park as a young hot-blooded boy way in over his head. Kazuhiko Inoue as a weathered veteran soldier, traveling alongside Toma, casually explaining the intricacies of combat during the journey.
ラグナ邸自身も最前線に赴き、国を守るために自ら魔族と戦ってきた。それゆえ、若獅子帝と称えられているのだ。
Oh, and Ryo Horikawa as an arrogant and stuck-up emperor of mankind fighting against a demon race from his airship.
伝説で語られる通り、いや、それ以上の力だ。こうしてジオフォートが目覚めている以上、政権の復活は間違いないようだな。
Actually, I didn't even know Horikawa was both Vegeta and Reinhard von Lohengrin before I looked it up for this video. That makes it even better as his character here is like a perfect mix of the two. It's a fantastic cast and it really helps elevate the cutscenes.
私って天才よね。これなら政権もすぐ私のものになるわ。さあ行くわよチビ。レッツゴー。あみちゃん、あれ。嘘でしょ。
Unfortunately, the undub still keeps the combat voices in English, and that can be a bit jarring. But I can deal with a little bit jarring if I also get some Romy Park and Ryo Horikawa doing what they do best.
皇帝だかなんだか知らねえけど、ぶっ飛ばしてやる。これ 意外な。聖剣の主というにはあまりにも未熟。
The other thing that I should mention is that this game has a memory card corruption bug if you're playing it emulated. This is not as big of a deal as it sounds. PCSX2 generates separate memory cards for individual games, and even then, it seems like only the slot you saved your game on gets corrupted, and not your entire memory card if that happens. In case you're curious, this is what it looks like when your save file corrupts itself. I used save states whenever I'd normally save my game to bypass this issue, since save states are a lot more reliable in my experience. Just make sure to wait for the game to boot up to the title screen before loading your save state, otherwise you get weird visual bugs. There is a post-game, and you can't get to it with a corrupted save file, but there are clear save data files on GameFAQs that work if you really want to play the post-game. All of this said, Shining Force EXA was a great experience. The story setup and main character duo was handled very well. Some of the setting and background made me wonder if they were intentionally pulling from the Wheel of Time series, which is a big compliment because that setting has so many cool concepts worked into it. At least even during some of the slower periods, this never turned into the slog that Wheel of Time becomes in the middle. Would I recommend Shining Force EXA? Yeah, if you like your Diablo-style hack-and-slash games, this is a pretty good one. It might be a bit clunky if you're expecting a fast-paced Japanese action RPG like Ys, but the power curve and how that's built up across the multiple passive systems are very satisfying to see grow over time. Speaking of time, I asked people on Patreon an important question, this time providing no context. Flower or flame? Of course, this was a Wheel of Time question between Cider and Sidene, the two sides of channeling magic. Flower won, just barely. I intentionally kept this one vague, figuring you'd vote for the cooler sounding fire, but it looks like the majority of you won't be going insane from channeling corrupted energy this time. Well done dodging that. As always, this video was brought to you by people supporting the channel on Patreon. If you would like to become one of the names that you see scrolling on the screen right now, head over to patreon.com/AboveUp and I will, see ya.